Hi, Granny Charlotte here, and today we're reading chapter 17 of Little Pilgrim's Progress. But we do have some more vocabulary words. Let's get started. Our word today is caution. To be careful and thoughtful before doing or saying something that could hurt someone else or hurt yourself. Caution. Ignorance. Not having any facts or knowledge about somebody or something. Ignorance. Conceit. A person who thinks they are someone really special and they are happy to tell about themselves. Conceit. Error. Being wrong or making a mistake. We can be wrong in something we do, say, or think. Error. Let's get reading. The next day, when the little pilgrims were preparing to continue their journey, the shepherds came to them and asked whether they'd like to go for a walk upon the mountains before they went away. Christian and Hopeful thought they would enjoy this very much, so the shepherds went with them over the broad green slopes and along the paths that had been cut upon the sides of the hills. It is not safe, said Knowledge, for strangers to walk across these mountains alone, but the king allows us to take some of the pilgrims to see the view of the celestial city. Presently they came to a steep path that was rugged and not very easy to climb. It led to the top of a great rock, and when they reached the highest point, Christian and Hopeful were glad to put their hands into those of the shepherds and hold them very tightly indeed. The rock was just at the edge of the mountain, and when the little pilgrims looked down from it, they could see a valley far below them, and upon the ground at the bottom of the valley lay the bodies of many dead people. Here's a picture of Christian and Hopeful as adults with the shepherds looking down over the cliff. It's so far down the cliff that I couldn't even show you that picture. And I really didn't want to show you all the dead bodies at the bottom. Did they fall from this rock? Asked Hopeful. Yes, replied the shepherds. This is the rock of error, and pilgrims who leave the way of the king and wander upon the mountains alone are fond of climbing up this pathway because they think they will have a better view from the rock. But when they look over, the sight of the deep valley makes them woozy, and they fall and are killed. Then the shepherds took the children to another place, which was called Mount Caution. From it they looked upon a wide plain where numbers of men and women and children were walking back and forth, up and down, but they walked in such a strange way, stretching out their hands as if to feel what was before them. And Christian noticed that they kept stumbling upon the rocks. Are they blind? He asked. Experience answered that yes, they were. Did you see a stile on the left-hand side of the road, not very far from these mountains? Asked Watchful. Yes, replied Christian. Beyond that is a stile and a path that leads to a strong castle. In the castle lives a giant named Despair. Many pilgrims go over into his meadow because near to the stile the way of the king is rough and stony, and the giant's path looks green and smooth. Then they almost always lose their way, and Despair seizes them and puts them in the dungeon in his castle. He is very cruel to them, and at last, if he doesn't kill them, he puts out their eyes and brings them down to this plain where they wander about until they die. Whew. Christian and Hopeful looked at each other, but they did not speak. Perhaps if they had not escaped from Doubting Castle by help of the little promise key, they too would have been left to perish upon that plain. Remember, it was the promise that got them away from the giant despair. The shepherds now went down the mountains on the side that was farthest from the way of the king. Soon they came to a spot that reminded Christian of the entrance to the dark valley. Great black rocks hung over the path, and the children could see only a very little distance down the narrow road because of the thick mist that lay before them. "This is another dangerous place," said Knowledge, "and pilgrims who walk alone upon the mountains are often lost here. That path leads into the country of the wicked prince, and pilgrims who enter it are never able to find their way back again." All these things made the little pilgrims very thoughtful. But Christian afterwards said, "I am glad that we saw them, although I was frightened, because now we shall be very careful indeed in keeping the way of the king." Last of all, the shepherds brought the little pilgrims to the top of a hill called Mount Clear, from which they could see a very, very long way indeed. Far in the distance, a beautiful light was shining, which dazzled their eyes when they tried to look at it. "In the midst of that light," said a shepherd, "is the celestial city. If your eyes are strong, you will be able to see its gates." But the light was brighter than that of the sun at midday, and its glory was too great for human eyes to bear. "I can only see it shining," said little Christian. "It is too bright for you," said Sincere, "but we have a glass called Faith, which will make it seem clearer." Christian took the glass, but the thought of the king's city, which he had so longed to see, made him tremble, and his hand shook so that he could not hold the glass steadily. Then Hopeful tried, but the tears came into his eyes. "It dazzles me," he said, "but I think I can see something like a gate." The walk upon the mountains had taken up the whole morning, so the shepherds led the children back to the tents and made them rest a little before they went away. "When you have traveled a little farther," said Experience, "you will very likely meet a man called the Flatterer. He will try to lead you out of the way of the king, but you must not listen to what he says." Then Watchful told them that they would soon come to a place called the Enchanted Ground, where the air made the pilgrims feel very sleepy. It was a part of the wicked prince's country, and if his servants find you sleeping there, they will carry you away. "We will give you this little map," said Knowledge, putting a sheet of paper into Christian's hand. "All the places you will have to pass are marked upon it, and if you look at it carefully, you cannot lose your way." As Christian and Hopeful went down the mountain path, they talked together of all that the shepherds had shown them. "If we could only have seen the celestial city," said Christian, "I should have been so glad." "Well," replied Hopeful, "we did see the glory of it, and we know now that it is not very far away." At the foot of the mountain, the boys came to the corner of a little crooked lane. This lane led from a country called Conceit, and a lad was running along toward the way of the king when Christian and Hopeful passed. "Where do you come from?" asked Christian, for the boys soon overtook them. "From the country beyond the hills," he replied, "and I'm going to the celestial city." "But do you think they will let you in?" said Christian. "Why not? They let everybody else in." "Not everybody. We have our rolls to show. Did the king send you one?" "No, but I don't suppose that'll matter. I am his servant because I always do what he tells me. I have heard that he wishes people to leave their own lands and travel to his city, so I am going, just as you are." "But," said Christian, "the king's pilgrims ought to come in at the wicket gate and pass by the cross. Then the shining ones bring them a white dress and a roll. I am afraid you do not know that." You needn't make such a fuss about it, replied the boy, whose name was Ignorance. I don't know where you come from, but very likely you were living by the wicket gate, and of course it was easy and convenient for you to enter it. It's a very long way from my home, and nobody ever thinks of going to it. In fact, I don't believe that anybody even knows the way. We have that pleasant green lane which saves all trouble and makes our pilgrimage shorter. Christian scarcely knew what to answer, and as Ignorance stopped to gather some fruit, the little pilgrims passed on without him. He did not run after them, and Hopeful said, "Shall we wait for him?" "I think not," replied Christian. "Perhaps he will join us after a while. Perhaps not." And that concludes our reading for today. Now remember, children, wash your hands, brush your teeth, and eat an ice chip. I am going to have a wintergreen on this warm day. Feels cold.